We have been in a conversation, a series called Connection. We've been talking about this idea of connection and how you and I, we were created for connection. The connection with God, connection with each other, and even connection with ourselves, right? That you and I, we were made for connection. And as the subtitle of this series would indicate, that the way that you deepen connection, right, it requires three things. That you're seen, heard, and valued. And not just that you are seen, heard, and valued, but that you give those as well, that you see, hear, and value others as well. So this is the conversation we've been in. How many of you have, like maybe when you were young or even now, played video games? Anybody play video games? Or even like go to the arcade, right? The arcade. I really love video games. And if you've played video games, you know like one of the kind of fun things about video games are the cheat codes. Yeah, cheat codes are the best, right? Cheat code, like you punch the right numbers in the right way or you enter the right thing, it like unlocks a new feature about the game. And sometimes cheat codes are just kind of silly, right? Sometimes cheat codes are like, oh, give your character a big head, right? Or, oh, make all the bad guys turn into rubber ducks. Like sometimes the cheat codes are just silly, but more often than not, a cheat code is designed to make the game easier. That's like what it is, right? You get extra lives, or the bad guys have less health, or whatever. They're typically designed to make the game easier. And I say that because when it comes to connection, there's actually a cheat code for connection. There's actually a singular thing that makes connection easier. That if you want to make someone feel seen, heard, and valued, the cheat code is invitation. Extend an invitation to them. I mean, what a perfect way. It's like the simplest way to invite someone into connection, because when you invite someone into something, what does that say? What does it mean? When you invite someone into that, it says, I want you to be with me, right? I mean, think about in your own life. How many of you maybe even have a memory as a kid being invited to someone's birthday party? And how much that meant to you. Or even the flip side of that, how many of you remember not being invited? Oh, the power of an invitation. How about like a memory you have of simply being invited to hang out with someone or a group of people? And now that's like your person, or that's like your people that you hang out with. And it all started because of a simple invitation into connection. Right? An invitation to go to dinner. How about an invitation to go out on a date? Whoa, talk about changing your life, right? An invitation. How about an invitation to come to church? I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for a buddy of mine inviting me to come to church and connect with what God is doing through his church. Right? Invitation, it's like the simplest little cheat code towards connection, right? It's the way of saying, I want you to be with me. Come experience this thing with me. Right? I see you, I hear you, and I value you enough to be with you. Invitation. We have for the last 3 weeks been talking about the invitation that God gives to you and me, that he sees you, he hears you, and he values you. It's an invitation that God extends to you to come be with him. But this morning, today, what I want to do is I want to take that invitation and I actually want to flip it. And I want to give us some really practical ways for you to bring invitation to God, for you to invite God to come connect with you, because he wants to connect with you. What I want to do is I want to go back, and this whole conversation around connection, it was born out of a particular piece of scripture that we refer to as the greatest commandment. That Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment, right? There's all these commandments, but what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus replies, and it's in Mark chapter 12, Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. It goes on to say, and love, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Love God, love others, and love yourself, right? That's what the series is all about. And this beginning portion about loving God, it's actually Jesus is referring to something back in the Old Testament, that he's reaching back into the Old Testament, something that was called the Shema. This was like the manifesto for God's people. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And the Shema, the word Shema is a Hebrew word that says listen or behold or hear this, right? It's like, I need your attention, Shema. And it goes on. It says the Lord is one. And it says love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Now, if you are familiar with the Bible, or like the history of how it was written, the Old Testament is primarily written in Hebrew. The New Testament was primarily written in Greek and a little bit of Aramaic. And so if you go back into the Hebrew where the Old Testament was written, these words, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, right? That's a good translation, heart, soul, and mind. But, if I were to say, hey, I've got a heavy heart, right? Like literally what I'm saying is I have a heavy heart. But is that what it means? No, it means that I'm sad or I'm grieving, right? It's similar. If you go back and you look at like the literal translation, it's like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. But what did it mean? Those words, if you were to translate it more towards what it meant, it would read, and love the Lord your God with all your all, and with all your all, and with all your all, right? You get the idea? Love him with all of who you are. That's what the Shema was. Pastor Brendan taught me too that this word love, it means to prefer. To prefer God with all your all. But if you're anything like me, I tend to justify, well, what do you really mean with all of my all, right? What does all actually mean? Like really all or just like mostly like who I am, right? And Jesus is brilliant. And so what Jesus does is he reaches back to this Old Testament thing and he brings it into his context and he uses these words that are packed with more invitational meaning, with more practical meaning. He uses the words heart, soul, strength, and mind. And literally, that's what those words mean. But if you were to unpack them, they mean so much more than just those words. And so what I want to do is I want to look at that and go, what does it actually mean to love God with all your heart? What does it actually look like? What's the invitation that you're giving God, right? If you want to prefer God with all your heart, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to connect your heart with God and say, Lord, I invite you in. I want to unpack this with us this morning. Heart, soul, strength, and mind. So let's begin with that first part. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. What does it mean to love God with all your heart? Right? In our like modern context now, like heart, a heart is like the symbol for like romantic or affectionate love, right? So like that's like the symbol that we use, right? Oh, heart. And actually, this is kind of an appropriate way to think about what it means to love God with all your heart. You see, if you were to unpack what that word heart means, the heart, it's what you desire. It's about your desires. It's about your affection. It's a word that is, it's about your passions. It's what motivates you. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning. Like that's what this word heart means. It's like the core of who you are as a person. The word heart is like, it's the why behind your life, right? It's who you were made to be and what you were put on this planet to do. That's what this word heart means. I'm going to try to give these like a word that it's not perfect, but I hope it gives you a little bit more of a handhold of what this word means. If I were to give the word heart a word, I'd use the word purpose. Love the Lord your God with all your purpose, with all of who you were put on this planet to be. Love him with all your purpose, right? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Love God with that. Right? At the end of your life, what do you want to be remembered for? Love God with that. What kind of friend do you desire to be? What kind of marriage do you aspire to have? Love God with that. Right? Prefer him with that. What absolutely breaks your heart in this world? What motivates you to be you? Love God with that. Love God, prefer God with all your heart, with all your with all your purpose, right? It's an invitation to say, God, all of my desires, all of the things that I want, at the end of the day, I want what you want. Right? I want to prefer what your purpose is for me over what my desires and my affections are. I prefer you first. For me, like as a practical way of explaining this, when I graduated high school, I wanted to become a doctor. And so I went to college, went to the University of Minnesota to become a doctor because that was my desire. And I learned real quickly that I am nowhere near smart enough to be a doctor. And so I stopped being a doctor. Over a series of events, what I learned is that actually the thing that the Lord had put in me, the thing that he was calling me to, was to go into ministry. Now, I joke with my wife, we laugh with each other because she actually graduated high school thinking she was going to go into ministry. And she realized she is way too smart for that, so she became a doctor. Yeah, how does that work out? But you see, for me, like what I recognized is God didn't build me to be a doctor. That's not my purpose. He built me for ministry, to do this vocationally, and just in my life. This is what I was built to do. And to give you a little insight into like, hey, what does it mean to do ministry, like as a vocation, right? It gets crazy town. Like there's people who have things going on in their lives. There's people who want to start things, people who want to stop things, people who have preferences, right? There's craziness. There's people that need to be taken care of. There's all, ministry can get absolutely chaotic and crazy. But you know what's amazing? Is that even in the midst of the craziness and chaos sometimes, knowing that God has put in me a purpose for ministry, I can, in the midst of chaos, go back to the start and go, okay, but Lord, this is what you've called me to. So let's go. Let's do this. It grounds you. When you bring invitation, Lord, what do you have to say about my purpose? About what you built me to be and do, to become? You can bring invitation and it draws connection, right? Lord, I want to prefer what you have for me over what I have for me. Now, when it comes to purpose, like vocational ministry is not the only thing that my heart is made of, okay? Like I don't have just like a purpose and that's the end of my life. Like, no, I've got so many things that I am purposed on this planet to do and to be, right? Being a good and godly father and husband, like that's a purpose of mine. Caring for and equipping and ministering to church leaders, like that's part of my DNA. That's what God has put in me. Caring for people, being someone who helps non-church people not feel judged by church people. That's something that God has put in me. That's a purpose of mine, right? You don't just have a purpose. You get all kinds of purpose. But the question is, have you invited Jesus to speak into that? Do you prefer what he has to say about that? Would you bring invitation to him there? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your purpose. Love the Lord your God with all your soul, right? What does that word soul mean? When we talk about the soul, oftentimes we get this idea of like, well, the soul is like the spiritual part of you, right? The soul is the thing that lives on after you die, right? The soul is the thing that the devil's after, right? He's after your soul, right? We oftentimes we think about the soul as just the spiritual part of us, but the soul is not about spiritual versus physical. Soul is more complex than that. It's more encompassing of that. If you were to meet a person, you're going to get a snapshot of their life, right? But that's not the whole picture of who they are. You might get a sense of who they are, but you don't get the full picture, right? The soul is kind of like that. You can't just take a little snapshot and get a picture of the soul. The soul is more holistic than that. It's broader than that, right? The soul. If I were to kind of wrap this around it, it's more about your personality, right? The soul is like when somebody who knows you experiences you over the long haul, what they're experiencing about you, like that's your soul. That's the essence of who you are. Right? If I were to put a word around this, I would use the word like your character or your identity. Right? That's what again, they're not perfect, but it's more of a handhold. the word soul. Now, here's what's important to understand about your soul. Your soul is not what you curate it to be. Your soul is actually what God has already declared it to be. It's a subtle difference, but it changes everything. Because you see, your behavior, right, the way that you act or even the way that you think, it may not actually be a real reflection of what your soul actually is. Because what has the Lord actually already declared to be true about you? He's already said that you are an image bearer of him. It's true about your soul. You are made perfect, blameless. That's what's true about you. You are fearless, right? That these are things that God has already declared to be true about your soul. Now, it may not feel that way. It may not look that way, but it's true about you. You see, loving God with all your soul is about coming into alignment with what he's already said to be true about you. What would it look like for you to bring invitation to God to say, hey, Lord, speak in that? What do you see in my character, my identity that you want to look more like you? I want to prefer what you think about that in me. I'll give you an example from my own life, one of the ways that this looked like. When I was younger, I had a lot of anger issues. I had what I affectionately, any Simpsons fans here, I affectionately called this my Ned Flanders syndrome. That what I would do is I'll be happy-go-lucky and wonderful and everything's great, and I would just bottle up all of my anger until I couldn't bottle it up anymore, and then I would just explode at someone. It was my Ned Flanders syndrome is what I called it. I would just bottle it all up, and then just a burst of anger would go out on all the people that were around me in that moment. My buddies at the time, they called me the little ball of anger because that's who I was. I was this little ball of anger, but that's not what was true about my soul. That's not who God had declared me to be. And so for 20 plus years now, I've been inviting the Lord into that part of me. And I've been trying and working and letting him transform me so that who I truly am, right, is becoming more and more aligned with what he has declared to be true about me. That I'm more patient now. I'm more kind now. Now, here's the deal. If you were to take a snapshot of my life, would you maybe catch me in a moment of anger, of that little ball of anger showing up? You might. Yeah, but that's not the essence of who I am anymore. That if you were to experience me for the long haul, I don't have people in my life who would consider me an angry person anymore. Because I've brought invitation to the Lord and said, Lord, transform this part of me. I need it to look more like what you've already said is true about me. And I brought invitation there. What would it look like for you to bring invitation for the Lord to speak into your identity, your character, to love God with all your soul? Love the Lord your God with all your soul. The next, love the Lord your God with all your strength. For me, this is like my own personal favorite one in this season of my life. Love God with all your strength. I love that word, right? Strength. The word strength, though, again, it carries all kinds of meaning. That if you were to look throughout the Bible and kind of words that it was connected to, or look outside of the Bible and the words that it was connected to just in the culture, this word strength, it was connected to your wealth, your money. It's a word that it's about your opportunities, the opportunities that perhaps you have that maybe others don't. It's a word that's connected to your privilege, right? Something that maybe you're privileged to do, or you have a position that allows you to have access in ways that others maybe don't. It's a word that it's connected to your giftedness, your skill set, your work. This word strength is about your endurance. If I were to try to put a word around what this means, like to love God with all your strength, I would use the word like power or influence. Love the Lord your God with all your power and with all your influence. Now, here's the deal with this one. I know, and especially in like the church world, right? We're taught, well, no, you don't have power, right? You don't have influence, don't have, and that's just not true. And it tends to go one of two ways, right? Deny your power, deny that you have any influence, or the flip side, we go, well, I don't have power. I don't have influence because those are the kinds of people that have power, right? The rich people. They're the ones that really hold power. right? Politicians, celebrities. Celebrities are the ones that have influence, really, right? And here's the deal. That might on some level be true, but what I need you and I to recognize is that, especially if you are a follower of Jesus, you follow a God who has power and influence, and you were made in his image. You have power and influence. You have it. It may not be as much as you want, or it may be way more than you ever expected, right? But you have power and you have influence. Can I just give you some examples here? If you have a job where you make more than $5 per hour, you make more than over half the global population. That's power. That's power. Do you have a smartphone? Right? Are you on social media? If you do, you carry in your pocket the potential to have more global influence than any single human being on the planet had just 100 years ago. That's influence. That's power. Do you have a high school education? Do you have a college education? A post-college education? That's power. Can we get even more like nitty-gritty practical? Do you know how to change a car tire? Do you know how to cook a meal? Do you know how to say something kind to someone? That's power. That's influence. You see, you may not have the power and influence you want to have, and you may not have as much as you will have someday, but you have power. You have influence. What would it look like for you to bring invitation to the Lord to say, come speak into that? Jesus, what do you want to say about the power that I have? Man, maybe it is too much and you need me to step away from something. Or maybe you just want me to leverage it in a little bit of a different way. Right? What would it look like to use the influence that I have to bring invitation to someone around me? Lord, what do you have to say about this? What would it look like for you to invite Jesus to speak into your money, to speak into your giftedness, to speak into the influence and the power and the strength that you have? What would it look like to allow the Lord to connect with you there and then to prefer what he has to say about that? Bring invitation to the Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your strength. And the last one, to love the Lord your God with all your mind. Right? Love him with all your mind. Now, the mind, again, if you were to unpack this a bit, what does that word mind actually mean? What is it representative of? The mind, it represents your thoughts, right? The mind, it represents your imagination, what you can imagine in the world that lives inside your head. It's your mind. What do you dream of, right? What do you envision for the future? That's your mind. This word mind, it's about your understanding. It's about your intelligence, but it's also about like your creativity, what you can imagine in your brain. It's like the capacity that you have to think and envision things. What a particular part of the Bible that I love that I think creates a lot of context to what it looks like to love God with all your mind is Romans 12, 1 through 2. It says this, Romans 12 says, therefore, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Then it says this, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What it looks like to love God with all your mind is not just to think and imagine and dream the way the rest of the world does, but to actually think and dream and imagine from the vantage point of God. What does he think about this? What does he see in this? What is his view of the world around me? If I were to put a word around what it means to love God with all your mind, I'd use the word worldview. What is your worldview, right? And this is a little bit of an odd one, but I want you to play this out with me, right? What does it look like to see the world the way Jesus sees the world? What does it look like to see your neighbor the way Jesus sees your neighbor? What does it look like to see your work the way that Jesus sees your work. It's about your worldview, right? To bring invitation, not just to see the world the way that your politics see the world, not just to see the world the way that your preferences see it or the way that your social group sees it, but to see the world the way Jesus sees it. To love God, to prefer the way he thinks over the way maybe you think or the way others think. Lord, help me to see how you see. Lord, help me to imagine what you imagine. Help me to dream, God, how you dream about what this could be someday. Now, I want to say something about this that I think is really important for the church, because oftentimes what I hear in church settings is a phrase that was used in the Old Testament that had a lot of truth behind it. It's found in Isaiah, and what it says is it's God speaking, and it says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways," right? The question that's asked is, who can know the Lord's thoughts? And the assumption is, well, nobody can, right? And too often as followers of Jesus, we end there. We go, well, I can't know God's thoughts, and we use it as a cop-out to do anything about anything, right? Because, well, I can't know his thoughts. God, he just works in mysterious ways. But get this, when Jesus comes on the scene, he dies and he raises back to life. He gives us his Holy Spirit. And then we learn this, that as people who now have God within us, this is what's spoken over people. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, New Testament now, after Jesus now, they go back and they quote that old saying, right? Well, who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to teach him? And the assumption is, well, nobody, right? We knew that. That's already, and then it says this, but we understand these things, for we have the mind of Christ. That's what's true about you. You have the mind of Christ. You can see things the way God does. You can dream the way that Jesus does. You can imagine things the way that Jesus imagines things. But will you bring invitation for him to give you that type of vision, to have that kind of worldview? What would it look like for you to allow Jesus to change your mind, to think the way that he thinks and see the way that he sees? Love the Lord your God. Prefer the Lord your God with all your mind, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. This is an invitation to say, Lord, come and be with me. I prefer your presence. I prefer your thoughts. I prefer what you have to say about these areas of my life. So, Lord, I'm inviting you to come speak. I'm inviting you to come and transform in me the things that maybe I don't know how to change. That's the invitation this morning. Is what would it look like for you to bring invitation to God to maybe an area of your life that you've never taken time to pause and listen to what he has to say? Now, I want to say one more thing about this before we go into a time of communion. When it comes to bringing invitation to anyone, including God, there is a catch. Because we've all experienced, you bring an invitation, but what you experience is rejection. It's scary. Inviting someone into your life can be scary because you don't know how they're going to respond. You don't know what they're going to say. And sometimes the same is true with Jesus. You bring an invitation to say, Lord, what do you have to say? But we have these fears that, what if he calls me to go do some crazy thing that I don't want, right? And he might. That's the scary thing about invitation. But here is what I need you to know about bringing an invitation to God to come speak into your life. Is that he loves you. He loves you. He's not out for revenge. He's not trying to get even. He's not trying to coerce you to do something you don't want to do. He loves you. Man, does he love you. You are his purpose. You are. Like you are the thing that God gets out of bed in the morning for. God prefers you. He loves you. I mean, if you from this moment on decided to never love God, he would still choose to love you. Like, that is how deeply he loves you. You're bringing invitation to that person, to that God, to come speak into your life. One of the wisest things that was ever spoken to me when it comes to connecting with God is a simple saying, love God, loving you. Isn't that beautiful? Think about that. Love God, loving you. Have you ever just loved the way that God loves you? Did you just sat in that before? And God, I love the way that you love me. This is something that has absolutely transformed my heart. It's transformed the way that I connect with God. I love the way that he loves me. And I love just loving the way that he loves me. And so when it comes time to bring invitation to say, Lord, what do you see? What do you want to say? Is there something you want to change? Is there something you want me to do differently? Do you just want me to sit? It can be scary, but I know that I can trust that God because I love the way that he loves me, even when it's hard. Love God loving you. Bring invitation. Allow him to speak into those different areas of your life and see what he has to say. And start to align with him because he is a God who loves you, who prefers you. You're his purpose. He loves you. As we go into a time of communion, this is a perfect opportunity to remind us that communion is God's invitation to us. Say, come to the table. I forgive you. You have my grace. You have my love. So come dine with me. Remember what I've done for you. Go back to that starting place, that the world may be chaotic and crazy and wild and all the things, but I love you. Don't forget that. As Grant reminded us during this time of communion, when the worship begins, you're invited to come to the table individually, as a family, as friends. Look around if you see somebody by themselves and invite someone to come to communion with you. And receive the bread and the wine. And remember Jesus' sacrifice for you out of love. And in that, may it be a subtle, simple reminder that you can bring invitation back to him. Lord, now what do you want to say to me? Let me pray for us. Lord, I love the way that you love me. I'm so thankful that I'm not the little ball of anger that I used to be. Because, God, you've walked with me and you've transformed my heart. Jesus, I'm so thankful to be in a community of people who serve because of the way that you've served them. Jesus, this morning, we want to bring an invitation to you. Lord, would you remove the fear? Would we hear you clearly? Because, Lord, everything of who we are, we prefer what you think and what you say and what you've designed us to be and do in those things. So, Jesus, this morning, we respond to your invitation to communion by simply inviting you back. Say, Lord, connect with us. Would you be with us as we know that you are? Jesus, in your name, amen.